Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 147. Bally, we're only 100 episodes away from our fabled favourite number in the world, 247.
247.
Which is the greatest number of all time, as we all know.
I think we have explained before what that tale is, but I think we should maybe save that tale next time for episode 247.
Sure, yeah.
Why don't we wait till then?
Yeah, I mean, you have to wait 4 years, I guess. Yeah. That is 100 episodes, so...
Maybe the story's not quite worth that wait, but...
no, it probably isn't, but we'll wait anyway,
Maybe we'll say it before then, who knows? You'll have to stay tuned.
Absolutely. So, I'm MBZ. I'm the host of this show where we talk about Nintendo video games. I'm joined by my co-host, Bally. How are you, Bally?
I'm very good. I think co-host is the wrong word. I think you mean Keyblade Master?
Oh, I see. Well, actually, I don't think that is the right word, because a Keyblade Master would have finished Kingdom Hearts 3 instead of bailing at the last boss, but I guess we'll get to that when we get to it.
Will.
An extended Kingdom Hearts minute on this week's episode of the show.
Kingdom Hearts rant.
Yeah, basically, I guess so. So, cool. We are here to talk about Nintendo video games, all that fun stuff. Bally, do you want to let the fine folks know what's coming up in the show for the rest of it?
Sure. So we're going to do a 2-segment show this week. It's going to be first segment of what we have been playing and a second segment of your listener emails. We've got a few to get through.
Yeah, and we get through those, and then we'll be like, hey, send us more so that we can fill it back up again. So that'll be a good thing to do. Also, stay tuned to the end of the show where we'll be talking about our next Backlog Club game and getting a vote up there, get a poll on Patreon and stuff. So stay tuned. We'll announce it at the end, and then you can all go over and vote and choose our next Backlog Club game, which will be exciting. Great. Well, let's get things started then on today's episode, Bally. We've got there's a big game that's come out, which is Super Mario Maker 2, but we're gonna do a big discussion on that after you just drop a bit of a rant about Kingdom Hearts 3 for us. Right.
Kingdom Hearts 3. There's a lot to say about this game. I'd never played the Kingdom Hearts game. Want to make that clear. I've always been looking to experience Disney games, and generally they have a fairly poor track record just of in terms of quality.
I mean, the only Disney game I think that I have played and owned is a Mickey Mouse game on PlayStation 1.
That's a good one, actually.
Which I actually really like. It kind of goes through the history of Mickey Mouse. It's a 2D platformer. It's very, very difficult. I never finished it. I only ever got halfway through, and it's a really punishing live system. One day I want to go back and play that game, maybe with save states and stuff like that, but that was my one experience with a full-on Disney-ass game.
Right. I think mine going back was probably something like good old Tarzan on GameCube that we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
And maybe another couple of movie tie-ins that I think I played back in the day.
Sure. I mean, there was obviously the Toy Story games as well. Actually, Toy Story 2 on PS1 is a cracker. I love that game. It's a hell of a gem. But aside from that, I remember playing the demo for the original Toy Story game on my dad's laptop in the car. Actually, one of my first games, I'm just suddenly all the Disney games are coming out of my brain. One of my favorite games of all time, my classic game, is Hercules
on PS1. Oh, you had it on PC, right?
But I played it on PC, exactly, as a 2D side-scrolling Hercules game that I need to go back and play because it's been so long since I played that game. So actually, yeah, I have maybe played quite a few Disney games I just forgot about, which some of them are pretty damn good. But I think a lot of the people who talk about classic Disney games talk about Aladdin on Genesis and stuff like that, or the Lion King, those old Capcom Disney games when Capcom had the license and they were making really good 2D side-scrollers. Obviously DuckTales, yeah. I played DuckTales Remastered. Look at me, man. I'm I've never played a Disney game. I guess I have played a bunch of them. So there you go.
There are a bunch of them out there. Some are much better than others for sure. But for a company like the size and scale of Disney, I think it is fair to say that they've not really had an overall really successful time in video game industry. And I think that a series like Disney Infinity was something that I was definitely keen to try out, but it kind of was intimidating to me in the sense that I didn't know where to start, and I felt that the amount of money you had to pay towards it to get the models and things and the models were something I wasn't interested in. It was quite a high threshold to get into that game. It was quite a lot of money.
Right. It was a lot of fan service, but also it was very targeted at a demographic that was all about Skylanders and stuff like that, right? It was on the Toys to Life market, and it was relatively successful at it, but it probably wasn't successful enough because Disney closed it down and they shut down that studio, and poor Johnny Vignacchi lost his job. But that's it's another tale for another time, I guess. But the thing with Disney Infinity and I think just generally that era is that they never really delivered on the promise of what you maybe wanted out of it in terms of the video game part, right? Like, I think they got Ninja Theory in there to help with some of the combat stuff. Maybe that was, like they just like put it out to other developers to help. But in terms of actually a video game that plays well, I don't know that it was that satisfying. I think it was competent, right? But It wasn't.
I mean, I was prepared that had it been a 40-50 pound package and it had 3, 4, 5, 6 Disney World experiences in there, I would have been up for it. It was the fact that it felt like a lot more expensive than that, and I was prepared for the gameplay to be not amazing, but it was a good experience of like these Disney worlds, and that's where Kingdom Hearts kind of appeals to me. And it was like
but the thing with Kingdom Hearts as well is you're like, I want to play Kingdom Hearts. I'm like, Bally, you realize like this is going to make literally less than 0 sense to you, because this is a franchise that is built on the idea of complete and utter nonsense. It is so incredibly convoluted, makes no sense, and I just don't really understand why you want to jump in at this third entry into this series.
Right, and I think that I agree with you on those points, but the reason I wanted to jump in was to experience those Disney worlds in like a video game setting and just see what the world of Disney is looking like in video games today. Like, as a big Disney fan, I felt like it was almost a duty, like it was something I had to see. I was really curious just to see what this game was about, and I was prepared to find the story incredibly convoluted, confusing, dull, and in large part it was. But I do think that what this game is really good at is those worlds, those settings. And just off the top of my head, I'm going to spoil what some of these worlds are. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil the Kingdom Hearts story, because quite frankly, I can't actually. I don't think I would be able to articulate how that story plays out in a way where anyone would feel spoiled in the slightest. So I'm ignoring that side of it, but I am going to talk about some of the worlds. So I would say that 100 Acre Wood and from Winnie the Pooh and Olympus from Hercules look noticeably worse than the rest of the worlds. So like, don't get me wrong, I think they look fine, but I think when you compare them to the Disney animation worlds and the Disney Pixar worlds, I think those worlds look almost identical to the actual films they're referencing, which I think is just incredible.
So I wonder if Hercules and 100 Acre Wood were in previous Kingdom Hearts games, because I know
Olympus definitely was, and I'm pretty sure 100 Acre Wood was.
Yes, I know that Olympus was. So if both of those were in previous games, it may be that the way that they're bringing them back is to make them look as faithful as possible. And obviously, because the last mainline game in the series was PlayStation 2, so perhaps that's the reason why they look worse. Noticeably.
Yeah, that's possibly it. And definitely, this game isn't scared to do flashbacks to previous games, and in those flashbacks, they do not update the graphics much at all. So it's very, very jarring, and that's from the very first cutscene in the game that does a big flashback of the entire story up until this point, more or less. You're going through all these horrendous looking, like, PS2 game, and we're now sitting middle end of the generation of PS4, which is what this game is, and it's a noticeable, really huge jump. And I think that's where I think Toy Story, like Monsters Inc., Big Hero 6, Tangled, Frozen, these worlds just look incredible. And I think that running around those worlds, the stories that those worlds tell are actually done really well. And I think the dynamic between Sora, Donald, and Goofy is like, it's fun. Like it's pretty funny at times. A lot of the writing is very jarring, definitely, but those smaller scale stories, seeing those characters interact with, like, Elsa from Frozen, and like Rapunzel from Tangled, and all these other characters, and Woody and Buzz are back, and here's Hercules, played by the voice actor for Hercules is bloody awful, but most of the voice actors are here from these actual franchises, which is incredible.
Right.
And those smaller scale stories are really cool, and it does actually feel like 6, 7, 8 games in one, and to an extent where you're spending a good 3-4 hours in each world, and it's just a really impressive, like, it's a bit like Octopath in a way, where you got the smaller local stories are much more rewarding than the grander story, which is just convoluted and less important in my view. And certainly the opening of the game in Olympus and the final boss fight in Olympus is incredible. Like, it's probably my favorite boss fight in the whole game, actually, and maybe that's a bit, it's not great to put your best boss fight at the start of a game.
Well,
but
yeah, I guess. And I think they did show that thing like before release as well. Is it like against a Titan or
yeah,
something?
so there's multiple Titans, and you're doing multiple things. And as someone who grew up in the 90s and is very fond of those 90s Disney films, it's a real kind of, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. Hercules is one of my favorite Disney films for sure.
Exactly. So I think these worlds are incredibly impressive, and something I wasn't aware of, but I mean, you were from following the coverage of Kingdom Hearts 3, was the Pirates of the Caribbean world. And I had seen footage of like Pirates of the Caribbean and Disney Infinity, and I assumed that like that was going to be the art style they were going to replicate. So I was prepared for the Pirates of the Caribbean art style to be very jarring and look kind of non-realistic, in a very cartoonish in a way. And they really, really went for the photorealism in a way
they did, and it's weird
I
as
wasn't
hell.
prepared for. And like Donald, all of a sudden, I should be clear, Sora, Donald, and Goofy, their form changes between all the worlds they go through. So
right, so when they're like in Toy Story, they're toys and stuff like
and
that.
they're monsters in the Monsters Inc. one, and so on. And so when they are in the Pirates of the Caribbean world, all of a sudden you can like see Donald's feathers like on his
like realistic drawn
feathers like poking out his head, and Goofy, all of a sudden you can see like moisture in his fur, and it's like, wow. And Sora just looks a lot more human almost. And then you see like the facial capture of like Johnny Depp and Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom and that from Pirates of the Caribbean. You're like, geez, they really went for it. Like, I can tell why this game just took so damn long to make, because I think the replication of the worlds from Disney worlds and the amount of detail that Disney have also obviously worked with Square Enix on just to make sure that these are accurate representations is above and beyond what you would really assume Disney would ever do in a video game, especially to do it with Square Enix. That is just the weirdness of Kingdom Hearts. It is like these two big companies, one famous for
it just shouldn't exist.
It shouldn't exist at all, and you can really see why it did take so long, because it is a really impressive package when you're looking at how those worlds are replicated. And like, I should say, Pirates of the Caribbean, you're swimming underwater, you're exploring the seas.
Right, so like all these gameplay variety that's happening in the different areas you're going to.
And there's full...
Like, and I remember watching the quick look and there being like this section where you're in a mech like Diva from Overwatch and like shooting things.
Oh yeah, there's...
Like, that seems like a one-off idea that's just in that world and nowhere else.
Yeah, and there's full-on Assassin's Creed 4 ship combat in Pirates of the Caribbean, for example.
It's crazy, it's ridiculous.
And there's proper exploration between islands and that sort of thing.
Sure. And that's not even to mention the gummy ship, which, you know, traveling between these worlds, doing a stupid mini game where you're floating around and shooting in space. How do you find that kind of stuff?
I mean, it handles horribly, and
I think that was people's complaint from the original game, was the gummy ship was people did not like it at all.
It's really not good. I like the idea that you fly a ship between worlds. I think that is good for the world building, but
right, contextually it's a nice thing.
Exactly, but trying to talk about contextual world building in a world like Kingdom Hearts is
it's just like, is there any context really needed when it's this stupid? You know?
Yeah, it's so like, I'm all up for magic, I'm all up for fantasy, but when you're depicting science fiction, magic, fantasy, there has to be rules based in these worlds, if you know what I mean. Like, Star Wars is
rules
a fantastic
in Kingdom
example.
Hearts. Rules, really?
Right, but you can even go as crazy as a game like Xenoblade Chronicles, which I think as a world holds together just about. Like, I would actually argue something like Star Wars is a stronger world just because of the detail thought through down to the most small scale. Droid is like incredible in a world like Star Wars, but Xenoblade, I'd say it's maybe going a bit too crazy, and at times it is a bit just over the top. If you just take Kingdom Hearts.
I don't know. I think there's a pretty consistent, at least for the majority of the game. The last like 10% of the game, like they go off the fucking deep end,
no,
which
exactly.
I love. But
Yeah.
also the world of the two Titans and the history of it and the way they explain things and like the way that societies interact with each other. I think it's all very internally consistent.
Yeah, I agree with the internal consistency, but again, the last end of the game, it does go off the deep end a bit in a way that I think does unravel some of the core rules of what that world is trying to do. And I'm just saying that a game like Kingdom Hearts, they never start with those rules in the first place. It's just constantly wild. You don't have any idea. I like to think like you would have a rough idea of what the people in this world do on a day-to-day business when the shit isn't hitting the fan, you know, like with this plot. Like where do they live? What do they do? What they can't just.
Well,
live.
I mean, they live in the world of the films, for God's sake. Like, it's the Frozen part of that game is literally just Frozen the movie, except Sora and Donald are in it.
No. I'm talking about the characters like Sora and that, where the humans.
Well, Sora's always on a quest to become a Keyblade master.
Right,
like,
but
he doesn't like have a real job and go to the toilet and stuff like that. He's a
there's
video game character.
Exactly, but there's no idea of, and there is like Twilight Town, so maybe that's where these people live. But the worlds of Frozen, the worlds of Toy Story, they're very much like these bubbles that keep unto themselves, and then you are going into those bubbles, and that's a good way of protecting the Disney, you know, brand of those films. They don't have the films mixing with each other in a way that would be unbelievably complicated and convoluted.
Sure.
So it's if you're given the task of having Disney worlds and creating a story around them, I guess, yes, the game does a good job. But the stuff away from the Disney worlds and just the way that you travel around in the gummy ship, and then Sora can like fly and crap, and then everyone seems to just warp consistently everywhere, and there's no rules, or it's just so crazy beyond any interest of mine that I'm just like, this is just rubbish. It's garbage.
Yeah, and I think that like just comes down to our difference in opinion on things like time travel, where you're like, it needs to make sense, it must have logical consistency, whereas I'm like, you know, as long as the themes are represented well, and as long as like the time travel creates a narrative satisfaction, then I don't really care if you bend the rules, you know. Like I would rather have a game or a story that is told with an arc that makes sense, even if like the random warping around is like not explained. Like I don't need the explanation, I just need it to be narratively satisfying. And I think a lot of my favorite time travel stories, you can unravel them and you can be like, oh, this is nonsense, but it's definitely for me far more about what is this achieving for what they're trying to say, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, I'd even say like I don't mind bending of the rules either. Even with time travel, I think there are some very good stories that involve time travel, and it is where the rules are bent. But I just feel like Kingdom Hearts, those rules don't even exist in the bloody first place. That's the problem.
Okay, sure.
There is so little reality to root back to, you know, the center of where the story starts and all that sort of thing, that it's just it's so crazy and out of this world that it's just ridiculous to the point where you don't care about it from the off.
Right. Yeah. But also I would argue that as someone who's jumping into the third entry in a series with like 9 games, all of which have a link together to make this story make sense.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say that you're coming in uninvested. Like you don't have 10 years of playing this series to invest yourself into it. Whereas if you had, then I'm sure you'd come out the other side with a very different opinion, be it positive or negative. You would at least have more fiery opinions about like what they did with the story. Yeah,
and like I feel quite scared to go back to previous games, just because one of the best aspects of this game, I thought, was the way that the worlds were represented and graphically just how impressive some of those worlds were. So if you take out how impressive some of the worlds are in the previous games, and I know it goes to some cool places that I would be interested in seeing, but without like a proper HD complete remake, I'm not sure I'm that keen to experience those worlds and try and get involved in that.
I mean,
story.
there is like an HD collection, but that's more of like a remaster type deal.
It's a coat of polish, but ultimately, I just Yeah, it's just weird, and like I've not even gotten to probably my main issue and why I was unable to like beat the final boss of this game, and that is that I just think the fight system is very poorly done overall. Like as a action RPG, it just feels. I don't mind a fight system that just feels very mashy, but if you're gonna go for a fight system that is just very mashy and you're going through hordes of enemies, it's when that fight system then requires you to counter and block and
Right, so the entire game you haven't had the expectation of complicating the mechanics. Like, you can basically, the idea is you can get through the entire game just by pressing the square button, and then you get to a boss where it's like, oh, actually, lol, you have to do all this other stuff, but you haven't practiced enough to where you're proficient at it.
Yeah, you can more or less get through the whole game by button mashing, and your reward for button mashing is stuff like the theme park rides that become a button prompt, and all of a sudden there's a pirate ship swinging and doing damage to enemies. There's teacups spinning around. There's like the raft ride and the Buzz Lightyear Galactic Command or whatever ride it's called, I can't remember, and you're like shooting, and these aspects are just such a cool spectacle that just keep the fights interesting, and they're not difficult, but they're just really satisfying to just see these things on the screen and all the other different like special moves you can do with specific characters like Mike and Sully or like Captain Jack Sparrow and all these characters that you can actually do some cool stuff with. That's all great, but then when the boss suddenly becomes much more about countering and blocking, all of a sudden you aren't getting all your combos in. All of a sudden you're not getting the ride rewards for hitting combos, and you're all of a sudden playing like a really hard fighting game in a way without the timing and, you know, precision that you would expect to like successfully pull off a counter. And all of a sudden, when I've played games like God of War and Spider-Man from last year, which has to have these impeccable fight systems where the timing on countering and blocking I thought was really, really well implemented, this game you just feel like you miss that first attack that the enemy's doing to you. That like this, I'm talking about the final boss or near the end when the enemies are more difficult. So the second you're attacked and they start their combo, it felt like there was no way to get out of that combo, and you're just taking a ton of damage until you're down to like you're flashing with like a few health left, and then you just get killed the next hit, and it's like this is pure miserable. And I appreciated this was going to be a tough end to the game, so I was very keen to just go into the menu and turn the difficulty down from normal to easy, but turns out you can't do that, and that's just really crap design. It's indefensible.
I think it's one of our pet peeves, right? Like, I think we generally have pet peeves about modernization of video games and like conveniences of modern video games, and I think we criticize a lot of games for certain aspects maybe outside of the game itself, more in terms of like how is this optimized, how is this built for being played in 2019 where people don't have as much time to play video games, etc. And the idea that in this day and age that you can't just on the fly change difficulty down is just a big turn off for me. It just really it frustrates me, because it's like, give people the option, like let people have the option to do it if they want to.
So yeah, not being able to change difficulty is just a nightmare, and so this meant that I was just unable to defeat the final boss, and that left a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth. But I went and watched the final boss, and I'm glad I pulled out of that fairly early, because that fight goes on, and even if I had mastered the fight system, I think I would have struggled massively on normal with that boss, to be honest. And the final cutscene is more garbage of what this story tries to throw at you, and the character development of like Sora and Donald and Goofy I think is quite enjoyable, and the way that they constantly talk throughout the game. But I mean, they don't meet like I don't want to talk about the end, but I don't know, it wasn't satisfying in the slightest, but I think the journey was actually really fun in a weird way. Like I do feel very conflicted about this game, and honestly, this game brought a bit of a Disney renaissance in me. Like, I went and watched Tangled and Big Hero 6 with Caroline, like,
Oh, nice, yeah.
from playing this game. Like, I watched Tangled after having done that bit, and knowing that Big Hero 6 was coming up, I watched that film ahead of playing it, and I'm glad I did, because they would have spoiled the entire film. But
Right, yeah.
and then, like, we went and saw Toy Story 4. Like, so I was really, like, invested in these stories, and really checking back in with where Disney are at now, like the Disney Animation Studios in particular, some of the films I've missed out on the last few years, and just kind of really excited about Frozen 2 later this year and stuff like that. And this game has really reinvigorated a lot of that joy I've had with Disney and, like, my childhood. And I can see why people are obsessed with this game, and it does have, like, its fan base that are just really into the stories, because I do think that those Disney worlds are very emotive and are like the childhood for so many people, especially like our age who grew up in the 90s. And I do think Disney are having a real renaissance in sort of the teens. I think the noughties, they really were, Disney themselves were really struggling, where Disney Pixar was really excelling. And I feel like Disney Animation has really come back into its own with stuff like Tangled and
Yes,
Frozen
100%.
and Big Hero 6 and, like,
And Moana. of course, is a big
absolutely.
one, yeah.
So they're really back firing, and I think it was interesting that this game included some worlds from like the renaissance they had back in the 90s, like Hercules that's in this game, some of the strengths they had with Pixar and the noughties like Toy Story and Monsters Inc. especially. Obviously Toy Story started way earlier, but then also, like, some of their new successes like Big Hero 6, Tangled and Frozen are also in this game. I think that's really nice. I guess another big success of the noughties was Pirates of the Caribbean. It was also in this game. So, like,
yeah, exactly. Very true, yeah.
just that was really cool to see. And as I said before, I think Sora, Goofy and Donald are hilarious, and I did enjoy a lot of that. Didn't get overly invested in the overall story. It's incredibly simplistic and complicated at the same time. So it is just all about hearts coming together, and hearts and friendship and love and all these things that you would assume Disney would want to focus on. So if you enjoy it on that level, then yeah, it's good. But trying to get overly invested in some of the characters and the time travel and the betrayal, and it's kind of like, all right, we get it.
It's
Fine.
weird because this series started off as a crossover between Disney and Final Fantasy specifically, right? And I think over the years the Final Fantasy layers have kind of dissipated, and instead you have the Kingdom Hearts layer, which is like their own characters that they created for this series, which basically all look like Final Fantasy characters but are actually original Kingdom Hearts characters. So
yeah,
things like Sephiroth from the original game, or like Cloud showing up, or like all these Final Fantasy things that were a big deal have kind of just disappeared from the series, which is a bit of a shame. I don't know if there is much of that still in Kingdom Hearts 3, but it would be cool if, like, you know, Terra or Celeste or someone from 6 showed up. Like, that would be fucking great.
So they've got there's a whole other character called Terra who has nothing to do with Final Fantasy in this game.
Yes,
so,
I
like,
know that as well. Yeah, God.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. I think that I would be shocked if people were invested in this game in the slightest if it didn't have the Disney coat of paint, because I think that is, in a weird way, the coat of paint is the reason this game is so popular in a weird way.
Yeah,
and there's not a whole lot of games that are like that. So yeah, that's weird, and I get that there are people invested in the story. I personally, having played just this game, and I might go back and play the others, I'm undecided on that. Having played just 3, obviously the end of the story, I couldn't get invested, but I had a really good time with this game. It took me like 38 hours or something crazy, but I actually really enjoyed it, and it was just such a nice game to just put a podcast on, experience these Disney worlds, pause the podcast to listen to some cutscenes, sing along with Elsa to Let It Go, and what more could you want in a video game?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it was a lot.
We'll check back in the year 2026 when Kingdom Hearts 4 comes out, and we have Star Wars worlds and Marvel worlds thrown into there as well to pad out the Disney catalog.
I mean, yeah, I think that would be awesome, and like I'm fascinated
Sure.
to see.
They're probably gonna do that. Let's be honest.
So in that sense, like I'm in. Like I'm now in on Kingdom Hearts. I'm totally up for another game if they give me more worlds and more characters and another 35-hour game. Let's just do it. And that's. But at the same time, the story was just god awful, and I feel very weird about this game in a way I don't think I was kind of expecting to be honest. But
yeah.
Kingdom Hearts 3. So that's my Kingdom Hearts minute for episode 147.
The longest minute this podcast has ever experienced, I guess. Great, fantastic.
Weird.
Well, let's take a nice bath from that, and let's bathe in something a lot more wholesome, which is Super Mario Maker 2, which is the big game of the moment and came out very, very recently. It's been about a week or so with the game, and I'm waiting to tick over that 10-day amount on my Switch to see just how disgusting I have been in terms of the hours I've invested. But like the first weekend, I can probably say I put like 15 hours into this game because there's something about level design, Bally. There's something, we were talking about this before we started recording, is there is something about the loop of having an idea and wanting to see that through to fruition, and really getting pedantic about the details and being like, okay, I want this to be perfect, and I have to constantly test it, and I have to constantly be thinking like, does this work? What if I throw this idea in here? Does that make it better? No. Okay, I'm gonna have to change that slightly. What if someone does this differently? Like, what if someone plays this and wants to speed run it? Can they get through this section? Do I have to block them off? Like, there's this constant non-stop thing that happens when you're designing a level in Mario Maker that makes it impossible to like take a break from it or put it down. And if you do in the middle of a level, like what I did with my really long one, like I'm going to sleep dreaming about it or thinking about it constantly in my head. It's an obsession unlike anything else I've really experienced in playing video games, designing levels in Mario Maker.
I think
kind of astonishing.
That loop that you've described, when you have an idea and you want to see it through to fruition, and you do kind of want to keep going while your creative juices are flowing. I actually think that might be the most addictive loop in video games I've ever experienced. Maybe like,
it's
and
pretty close for me.
I don't get it as much as you. Like you've definitely gone again like a lot harder with a lot more levels. I've only made like 2 levels, but I'm totally up for making more levels. But when I'm in the middle of that idea and thinking, how do I do the next part? Where do I put the checkpoint? Do I need to do this? I need to test this. I need to keep testing this. And like 3, 4, 5 hours pass, and it just feels like the most seamless time in video games almost for me to a degree. It's like, and that's something really special that goes above and beyond, I think, what Nintendo even anticipated people might feel with this game. And it's definitely this, they're having this debate on Waypoint, I believe, where I think Austin Walker was saying, what is the ideal level that you make? And they were talking about some of the labels that you can put on the levels, for example, how Patrick Klepek was like, they should have a label that says Kaizo. And it's like, but Nintendo would never do that, obviously, because they expect you to make levels in a specific way, but at the same time, they let you do all these things.
It's weird, right? Because there are these moments where Nintendo acknowledge stuff. Like, you go to the eShop and there's the news tab on the Switch, and there's literally a thing which says, hey, here are some Metroidvania games. Like, Nintendo are using the language of
fans, yeah.
Yeah, it's the language of their fan base, and it's very weird to see that happening. But to me, I think that's more of like the PR and marketing people doing that as opposed to the development side. Like, the development side is very much like, isolated from a lot of those types of things, but they also show that they do care about what people want, and I think Nintendo have constantly proved that, not only with like Smash Brothers being the big example of like constantly with Ridley and then K. Rool and like Banjo and all these things happening, they are listening to their fans, but also there are so many frustrations I have with Mario Maker 2, like so many tiny little cuts that kind of add up to, a lot of bleeding. But also the body is so whole that it's hard to kind of for it to die. Like it's very weird.
Like it's a lot of cuts in your right foot or something. Like it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not
like you can survive, and like it's strong. It's a strong body, but like there's lots of little cuts along the way, and it's annoying, and it creates friction. but the base thing is so fucking good that it's hard to like tear it down, if you know what I mean. Like, and for me, when I think about it, actually in reality, there's not a whole lot different I'm doing with this game than I did with the first game.
That's what I feel as well, yeah.
The major differences in terms of the way I'm playing it personally is there's new course elements. Like, that's the big thing. For me, this is practically like a deluxe edition, but they just added a bunch of course elements. And there's a lot of additions, like not only with like the extra themes, the different types of levels with like desert and stuff now, but you also have the night versions which add weird twists to each of them, and then every single element they add has some weird way that it can interact in ways that you don't think it can. And it's not only with the on-off switches that have so many uses that are so varied, but even stuff like the seesaw that can be like, there was a level I was playing that Nintendo had made in the story mode, and I think this is one of the reasons I should play a bit more of the story mode, because it gives you ideas, is seeing a thwomp interacting with a seesaw, and so using that to like hit it down and then raise it to a different platform. Stuff like that is really interesting to me, where you have these disparate elements of the Mario toolset, and the way they interact with each other is the fun part. It's like seeing levels where people make crazy contraptions and somehow get these parts to work together, when really in a traditional Mario game, Nintendo would never do something like that. And yet they're really encouraging it in this game, especially with the story mode, and showing you all the different ways that you can use these course elements to synergize into something that is wholly unique and different. And I think that's the most exciting part for me. And I think the reason why Nintendo's game design of recent years has been so exciting has been that interactivity between disparate elements, like Breath of the Wild being the most obvious example of, hey, what if I do this and this? If I have this idea, can it work? And Mario Maker is definitely more constrained than that. It's not as freeform, but you still have these course elements that have interactivity, and when you put them together, they do something potentially unexpected, potentially surprising. And I think that's kind of the excitement that I have about Mario Maker generally.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I'm getting most fun out of the new items and things that you can do with the tile sets. I think the new 3D World tile set is fantastic. I think
it is a little bit limited comparative. Like, there's some stuff you can do that you can't do, which is obvious. Like I think the blinking blocks and stuff like that is fun.
The stuff like the spike block for 3D World is 4 blocks large, and I don't even think there's an equivalent spike block that's 1 block large. So if you're just trying to block out that one little area that you need to make sure someone can't get through or something, you kind of need to design around a big 4 block, and it can be a bit clunky.
I think there's just like everything is kind of larger in 3D World generally. Like, it just, because the game is pulling from a original title that is in 3D, I think just the asset generation and the way the assets are has to be a bit larger, just to make it feel like that original game.
Right.
You know, like the big piranha plants and the giant bullet bills and all these types of enemies, like even the kind of like caterpillar type things you can bounce on. You know, they're all kind of large in comparison. So yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, and all that stuff is great, and like the sort of the 1,000 cuts that you're talking about, and some of my experiences just going online and like, where's my friends list? Like, how do I find that? I had to like do a tweet.
Like I had to be like, where is my Mario Maker ID so I can send it to people? And it's this tiny thing in the corner of another page that you have to open a window and find. There's no easy way.
No.
Like, I just think the UI is just poorly designed. It just feels like there's no easy access to things that you want to get to. And this happens often with Nintendo, right? Like, they don't really understand how people play their games. And I think Mario Maker is one of those key examples of, they have less control than ever over what people do in this game and what levels they create. And so they still want to kind of exercise that Nintendo-like control over you. And so they like put these things, and like it's frustrating.
Patrick Klepek had a great idea on Waypoint Radio. He said, what if they had a feature where it was like a white flag button or something, or like you press it and it reveals how the person who uploaded the level beat the level. So either you're playing a puzzle level,
like a ghost, almost.
Yeah, like exactly how you can watch their ghost, how they beat their own level. And he's not saying like that should be for every level necessarily, but maybe have the option. So if it is like a puzzle based level, and you've been banging your head against it for like 20 minutes, half an hour. You're like, how do you move on? You can be like, right, let's see how they uploaded it, and they found
have like
this
a hint
block,
system almost.
right? And that seems like a feature that shouldn't be too difficult to implement. Surely that data is there. They know how you beat that level.
Right.
But like, there's just some really quality of life things, and we can get into like, and I've not tried it yet, at least, like the whole multiplayer online thing. Apparently that's horrendous, and
I have deliberately not tried it because I have not seen a single piece of footage where it is not a lag fest to hell. It is just disgusting how they expect us to pay an amount. It doesn't matter how much money it is, we're paying for an online service now, Nintendo. If we're paying you money to have an online service, not only do they not have friend play at launch, but the system they launch with is among the worst experience I've ever seen in terms of an online game.
Yeah.
It is god awful. It is horrific, and it is just actually, it is insulting that Nintendo expects us to pay for this when this is what they're offering us. It is Brawl-like. It is Wii era-like, which is not what you want to be having in this day and age. And not to mention the entire friend code system of this game that doesn't even pull from your Switch friends list. What is the fucking point of the Switch friends list? It is completely and utterly useless. It does nothing. You cannot invite people. All you can do is see how many hours they played of video games. But in terms of actually connecting to them in a video game, drawing that friends list into Mario Maker so you can easily access it. No, here's another 9-digit goddamn code you have to put in, and then every level has a code as well. It is incompetent beyond belief, and it just baffles me that we still exist more than a decade after Nintendo first started doing online games, and this is where we are. It is baffling. Like, how can you be this incompetent? It makes no sense. They literally live in a bubble. They do not know what an online experience should be. And it's like we talked about with the 3DS stylus or the DS stylus. It's like they come up with a good idea, they nail it, and then they constantly unravel it and feel like, no, we've got to do something different this time. We've got to do this. And I don't know. It's not like they've ever done online correctly, but, you know, there have been examples where they've done it better than they had done in the past, and they consistently just don't. So I mean, like, I really want to play. Like, the idea of co-op levels is exciting to me. I think the levels they showed off at the Nintendo World Championship were awesome. That was really clever puzzle design, really cool stuff, and I'm sure there are creators out there who want to make co-op levels, but I think a lot of people are being turned off by it because, number one, like, the online is awful, so even playing them with people is kind of a nightmare. But you can't play them with the people you like. Say you're a level designer, you want to play a co-op level with one of your friends. The level you make, not only can you not play it with one of your friends, you could potentially, when you're going into co-op, not even come across it because the levels they drop you into could be any level. That's the way the co-op multiplayer works in this game, is it could be just a single-player level, not even one that is tagged as co-op. Just why? Like, why not have a bin where you drop people into where it's only levels tagged as co-op that you are able to play in co-op mode? It's just... And I know I've ranted a lot, but, like, I think that the reason why I have to is because the rest of the game is so fucking great. Like, the rest of it is exceptionally well made, and obviously there's a drawback. It's not the Wii U. The Wii U was the perfect system for Mario Maker, and I agree with a lot of the complaints people have, because holding the Switch in handheld mode and using a stylus and all that stuff, it is more tiring. Like, the Switch is a heavier device. My wrist hurts more from holding it and then switching over to play than it did with the Wii U.
And you need a stylus. I think there have been people saying they just use their finger, and my view on people who just use their finger to make these levels is, well, you're not much of a maker then in that sense, because honestly it's way easier with a stylus. Yeah,
well, I mean, it will take you way longer to make a good level if you're using your finger.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are, like, spending 5-6 hours like I did on one of my levels, I know you spent about 12 hours, like, imagine doing that with your finger. Like, are you kidding
Imagine
me?
Doing that on the fucking TV with the controller. Like, I tried that for a while. I was streaming Mario Maker and I was like, let's see, like, how I can make a level with the controller, and I'm sure I could get used to it. I'm sure I could figure it out. But no matter how good I got with a controller, it would never be more efficient than using the handheld mode with a stylus.
It's the small fiddly things of, like, matching a platform up to another one, just fixing the little, like, oh, I need one more block there, I need one more little thing there. Like, in terms of the sweeping strokes, I'm sure it's quick, but when you're trying to just fix those little bits that in the long run make a big difference to the level, just getting a stylus, getting the eraser, doing undo, redo, just get the right thing, put it in place, like, you can do that so much more effectively with a stylus.
But even that is frustrating. Like, the whole idea that copy and erase is now a toggle instead of a hold action drives me insane.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, yeah.
Because it was like, this is what I'm talking about. Just like the DS stylus, you got it right with the DS Lite. It was on the side, it stood out perfectly great. It's like they got it perfect with Mario Maker 1. It felt great to do one on this shoulder, one on this shoulder. This is the copy, this is the erase, this is how it works. And then for some fucking reason they just decide, oh no, we'll just take this good idea we had and throw it in the bin and put in a worse one. Like, stuff like that is just like, why? Why do you make that decision? It doesn't make any sense. It's change for the sake of change, which is, I think Nintendo like that, you know? I think Nintendo like being, oh, we gotta, you know, make it different. But, like, different isn't good all the time.
And that ethos works great with, like, Breath of the Wild, but then when you're talking about online, like, menus and UI and how multiplayer works online, like, it makes a big deal that you build on what is already successful. Like, it's huge.
Yeah, and little things like they added the zoom out mode, which is great. I like that feature. I think it's really good to get a sense of the whole level. But to be able to only, like, copy and erase and stuff in that mode is a little bit restricting. Like, I wish they gave you the opportunity to maybe, you know, tile over things or even, you know, use some of the tools when you are fully zoomed out. That's the kind of part of the game that, for me, the making is still very good, but it is clearly designed about a different interface. And have you had this problem where, like, trying to color in blocks that are right on the edges of the screen, like right at the top of the screen, where the toolbar at the top kind of covers up the first square?
Yeah, it's easy to miss out a block at the very top, and in certain levels someone could just jump over the top. Is that?
Well, no, I'm more talking about, like, when you're coloring in, like, blocks at the top of the screen.
Yeah.
Just having to move Mario up to get the little menu to disappear.
Oh, right, got you. Yeah, no, it's a bit annoying. Yeah,
and then it's a fiddliness that I don't think the original game had. Like, why is that overlaying the level? Why is that not in its separate thing that doesn't overlay every time? And it is very much that this game, with the radial menus, with all that stuff, which I think actually some of the radial menu stuff is smart. I think that categorizing it into blocks and enemies and gimmicks and stuff like that is good. I think that makes it easier to quickly access some of your stuff. But it's still designed around a controller-based implementation because it's a radial menu, right? And that's what controllers will find easier than a big old list where you have to scroll down, as opposed to the stylus in the first game.
It's an improvement in some aspects, but it's...
As we say, like, 1 step forward, 9 steps back with Nintendo all the time, constantly. Yeah, and what about story mode? I know you've not played much of that yet.
I've not even touched it yet, but I've kind of...
Have you not? Have you not even opened it?
No, but I've kind of just thought, right, I want to reserve my energy for Mario Maker just into that creativity and into the making, because it takes me a bit more, like, oomph to get my creative juices going and get into that mode.
Sure.
So when I've got Mario Maker, I have really enjoyed playing a lot of, like, listener-made levels that people have been posting in Discord, and that's been really great.
Yeah, which we should shout out. Like, our Discord link is in the description of the show, and we have a tab now on our Discord for Mario Maker levels, and people are posting them in there. Everyone's playing each other's levels, giving feedback, all that good stuff. That's been great, and I've been playing a lot of those levels.
And we didn't have Discord when Mario Maker 1 came out, so it's now a really great place where people can say, oh, this is my level, this is how it is, and people have been suggesting, like, this is how you could change it, this is how you make it better. Oh, that was a really great level, and yeah, that's been really, really enjoyable.
As I said, like, I think for me, Mario Maker, a lot of the joy of Mario Maker is outside of the game, right? It's me going...
Yeah, it's the communities it builds, and, like, being able to talk about level design and watching people play incredibly hard levels and watching people play their own levels and seeing, oh, this is what I could have improved more in that aspect, and it's incredibly satisfying.
Totally. Like, I've done the exact same thing I did before, which is go to Twitch, search Mario Maker 2, scroll down to the very bottom, find someone who has like 2 viewers and say, hey, will you play my level? And more often than not, they're like, oh wow, like I've got someone watching me, I'm going to play this level that they've sent me. And it's great because you get the benefit of seeing someone else play your level, which is an inherent joy that I don't think I've felt outside of this game. And they get the fun of someone interacting with them in chat and talking to them and stuff like that. It's a mutually beneficial thing, and I think it's a smart thing that people should do if they want people to play their levels. And I think it's a lot of the reason, like, when Giant Bomb got criticism for them being like, you know, putting Mario Maker on a pedestal and being like, it's a great game, because they have a big audience, right? So they have lots of people who will play their levels. But I actually think that's a fallacy, because it's not about having a big audience. It's about having one person. It's about having one other person who you can watch play your level, or even just one friend who you can send your level to. The real joy of Mario Maker is that connection between the creator and the individual player. And anyone can do that in this day and age. And I think that if you want that experience, you can totally have it. Just go on Twitch and do that. And obviously you can get lucky sometimes if you have bigger YouTube creators that you leave codes for them to play. Sometimes they'll play your level. I remember Patrick Lepic played one of my levels, and then Nintendo Capri Sun played one of my levels in the first game. And, you know, that does happen from time to time, but you 100% can get the social experience of it. And I think another part of the social experience of it is playing levels by people you know, YouTubers you watch or Twitch streamers you watch, or even like people like us. Like, people have been saying, oh, I like playing your levels because I know who you are, and so I get this inherent satisfaction of, like, I know the creator, therefore it feels better to beat the level. Like, you feel like you are more motivated to go through and actually finish it, as opposed to just some random level that you see online.
I took your advice and did like the Twitch thing, went to the bottom, and I kind of scrolled up a little bit, so there was someone around 20-30 viewers.
Okay, cool.
And I went into his stream, and he was just like god tier skill at like Mario Maker, and I was like, hey, do you want to try my level? And then people were like, get in line, dude. Like, you're fourth, you're fourth in line. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to wait around here and watch this guy face my level, because he is really good at this game. So I waited my turn. I was fourth in line. Eventually, he's like, right, who's next? And I sort of said, I believe it's me. It is me. I've been waiting a long time. It's me. And he tried my level. This is level, I think it took you about
half an hour. It's the shell one.
This is the use the Force Luke, and I'm finding no one. The one weakness of my level is no one is understanding my niche reference. No.
It's a good reference though when you understand
it. I'll leave that for others to work out. But anyway, it took you about half an hour to beat MBZ. This guy must have done it in about 5 to 10 minutes, and I was like, wow! Like, it was just really impressive knowing that. Like, I thought I'd develop, and I could have made the level hard. I'm not going to say, like, I wasn't trying to make it impossible. I was trying to make it
it's a doable level,
but not crazy. It's a doable level. And this guy just absolutely nailed it in about 5 to 10 minutes. And he just had such a positive attitude when he died. It was just like, oh, nice, right, okay. And then even when he fell for my troll thing at the end, he's like, yeah, you got me. And then he just went again. It's like that. There's some streamers out there that just have this crazy positive energy for like constantly playing Mario Maker levels, and I think it's a really cool thing.
Definitely, yeah, and it's weird, right? Because we talked about this when the original game came out, and you hadn't played as much as I had, but like I think part of the reason we chose Mario Maker as the game of the year was because of like things that happened outside the game with the Patrick Lepic, Dan Reichert feud. And
are they going to go at it again, or are they're kind of going?
I don't know. Dan seems to have fallen into this thing where he's making nice levels now. His latest few levels are all really nice.
He'll get bored of that eventually, and then
he will. Yeah. But yeah, I so talking about a little bit about the story mode, because you haven't played it, but I've played some of it. I think it's a really cool thing. I also believe like very much in the fact that it is pretty much what we had in the first game, just prettied up. Essentially, it's not what people thought it would be, which is, and I warned people, I'm like, this isn't going to be a full Mario game. Like, it's not going to be like a Mario World or whatever. This is just a bunch of levels to teach you how to play this game and to teach you about the mechanics that you can use in ideas for your own level. And as far as that goes, I think it succeeds tremendously. I think it really shows you, here's an idea, here's how this thing interacts. Like, I learned that you can, the flames that shoot up from the ground, you can put wings on those and they fly around. I knew that before. But there's this level where you put on a shell cap and you can jump into those guys and they die. So you can kill those with the shell cap on. And so one of the levels they made was kill 9 of these fire things. I'm like, how am I going to kill a fire thing? But it kind of teaches you, it's like, have the shell cap on,
really cool.
jump into them, and they die. And it's like, that is an interaction that I didn't know about.
I think I'll jump into that story mode in that case, just to learn some more ideas and get those.
Well, exactly. That's
flowing,
why I've been playing it. It's not necessarily that these levels are great and super fun. Like, they are. I think they're all really well designed levels, but they're not traditional Mario levels, and I like that because I'm not a fan of traditional Mario levels. They are there because they show you an idea, they give you a seed that you can then run with and say, okay, this is a cool interaction. How can I build a whole level about this and like build on this idea and make it maybe even more complicated than what Nintendo has shown me? And that's smart, right? I think that is, and it really shows that this game, yes, is about playing people's levels, but more than anything, this is about creation, and it is about having a go yourself and trying something and trying to make a level on your own. And it feels like the story mode is just geared towards getting your creative juices going a bit and saying, here's a little idea, what if you take that away and do something with it? Which is great. And I think a lot of the new additions, like the clear condition, is cool. One of the drawbacks of it is you can't have checkpoint flags with clear conditions, and I think that's because when you die, things get reset. So things like coin counts and stuff like that.
Yeah. I want to make a level with some unusual clear condition. I think that's my next goal.
Yeah, I think I need to do that as well. One of my levels I had was all about collecting. It's a very easy level. It's about getting 100 coins, and I couldn't put a checkpoint in it. It's very small. But like that was my dabbling in it, and now I want to think of like, okay, what's a really unique thing I could do with a clear condition, and then build a whole level based around that idea. And a lot of the levels in story mode are based on specific clear conditions. Like one of the ones I'm playing at the moment, which they actually showed off on the Treehouse live stream of Mario Maker, is a brilliant level where you're not allowed to jump. You're not even allowed to fall off a place. Your feet are not allowed to leave the ground. And the ideas it throws in there, the way it implements, it's just so freaking smart.
So you can make a level with the rule set. Your feet aren't allowed to leave the ground.
Basically, yeah.
Aside from story mode.
No, you can do that. You can do that in your own level,
right?
And
cool.
You won't be able to touch the flagpole if you have jumped or left the ground. Essentially, your feet have to be on the ground the entire time, and that level is genius. It's brilliant. It is so smart and well designed, and it almost is intimidating to some degree because there are so many great ideas in there that you're almost left thinking, well, what ideas do I have to add to this? Because they kind of did everything. So sometimes that will happen. Sometimes they give you maybe a bit too much in terms of thinking like, well, I'm never going to make a level as good as that one. But I like that they do show you those things. They're like, well, this isn't the only thing. You can kind of shift it up and change it. Yeah, but in terms of like the overarching framework of the story mode, it's very simple. It's like, I have more jobs for you. Okay, do all these levels. Then each level you do will be one more notch onto the castle being rebuilt. And then once that section gets rebuilt, you have to spend money to rebuild another section. So it's very basic, and there are some fun characters in there. The writing's fine. Like, there's not a lot of it. You have the undo dog, and you have the eraser guy. Like, all these parts of the tool set have been characterized, as Nintendo often likes to do, as we talk about with like the Wii Balance Board. They like to make characters out of things that aren't actually characters, and Mario Maker continues in that tradition. So yeah, that's been pretty cool. But yeah, there've been some really amazing just creative levels out there. One of my favorites that I played or saw, I think Giant Bomb maybe play, was one of the highest rated ones. That is table tennis, and it is you controlling a bullet bill launcher, and there's another bullet bill launcher on the other side, and it's you jumping with a spring to control this thing so that it's like a paddle. You're basically playing Pong. It's basically you playing Pong, and it is incredible. It is just so ridiculous, the engineering behind it, like how they thought it out, how it worked. You should check it out. It's pretty highly rated. It's on the like star rating system, whatever, and the popular courses. It's probably still up there. Yeah, that like, the things that people do with Mario Maker are astonishing. They really just... I think that's the thing about it, right? We talk about Dreams a little bit, and Dreams is exciting because you can do anything, but I think because you can do anything with Dreams, it breeds less creativity.
It's kind of too much in a way. Mario Maker is
It's
quite
almost too much
manageable in comparison.
Right, and I think the reason why Mario Maker is so great is because limitation breeds creativity, and this is a thing that like people talk about with old games and how old games had to get around constraints by doing weird things and different tricks. But when you have hard limitations, it makes you work around them, right? It makes you figure out a solution that maybe wasn't so obvious, and that's why so many things that people put out there for Mario Maker are exciting, because it's like, whoa, you could do this, and it's so unexpected within the given tool set and the rules that you have. So yeah, I mean, I love it. You know, it's a fantastic game, but it comes with a lot of caveats, and it comes with, I think, especially us who have come off the Wii U and have played the original game, there are a lot of expectations for it that maybe some of them are not met. But at its core, the thing that I'm going to spend 90% of my time with this game doing, which is making levels, is probably better than it has been. And I think it is, like, aside from some annoyances with the UI, the tool set, the improvements, all that stuff, it's great. It's really fantastic. So yeah. Any other aspects of Mario Maker that you have, any cool levels you've played or anything that you've been seeking out with it?
I've not been doing a whole lot of seeking out levels yet. I've played a lot of listener levels, and that's been good fun. But I definitely need to. I really want to try that Pong one now that you've talked about it.
You should, cool. Yeah. I think a good idea is to just go to the popular courses and just go down them, because a lot of those courses are ingenious. They're quite easy. They have a high clear rate. The reason they have so many likes is because so many people are able to finish them, right? I think that's one of the benefits of this popularity type thing, is like a Dan Reichert level, like a hard one, is not going to... I was looking at his profile. The newer levels he's made that are much easier, more clearable, have like 10 times the number of likes that his fucking impossible level has. And for that reason, I think in popular courses, the stuff that rises to the top is what the majority of players will enjoy, which are clearable, beatable levels. So a lot of the time, stuff that is put there is really good because of that idea, that like people will naturally want to click like on a level that they have found, you know, more enjoyable. And I think that happened with me as well. Like, my easiest level is the level that got the most likes when I first started putting my levels out. And the hardest one, obviously, has the least, because less people have been patient to stick with it, less people have gone through. And as I said, if you don't know the person who's making the level and you just come across it in the endless mode or whatever, you're far more likely to be like, I don't know what to do, I'm going to skip it, and not even think twice about it, right? Whereas if you're invested, you're going to put that time in and really care about it. Yeah, again, I've not really dipped into Endless. It's not really my jam. I never really played the 100 Mario Challenge that much. For me, there are so many people out there on Twitter throwing level codes. We've got the Discord. There's so many avenues for me to access good levels by people I know, or levels that I want to play, that there's really no reason for me to just have the random machine throw whatever the hell at me. You know, I don't find that as enjoyable. I'm not as invested in those levels. So yeah, I think that's kind of the way I've been playing it. And again, majority of the time creation, but it's still Mario Maker, still one of the best ideas Nintendo has ever had, and it continues to work. So yeah, I will say I need to get a new Joy-Con, because mine is now drifting like a motherfucker, and it is driving me insane.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Try playing Cuphead with that.
Oh fuck! That it sounds terrible.
It was.
That's awful. The level I was making recently, you have to hold down because it's sliding, and the Joy-Con drift like thinks I'm pressing up.
You just pop up randomly into a spike.
Well, no, it doesn't even. Well, I press the down button on the D-pad, and Mario does nothing because the Joy-Con drift is like pushing upwards. God, yeah. It's like, fuck, why? It's terrible. So I mean, that's not related to Mario Maker. That's my own issue. But again, Nintendo's hardware problems this generation have been stupid. Cool. Okay, any closing thoughts on Mario Maker, or are we gonna... I think that's pretty much it.
I love it. Need to play more.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, so we are going to take a break here. We'll be back afterwards, though. Don't go away. We'll be tackling some of your emails and things you have sent to us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. It's the second segment, and this time we're going to cover your listener emails in our second segment. This is also the final segment of our 2-segment show this week. We need more emails. We always say this. Please send them to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com, or post in our Discord server. We've got a lot of people always joining in there, especially with Mario Maker on the go at the moment, and lots of chat about games coming out and things. So definitely check out the link to that Discord server in the description. It's also on our Twitter account @TNL Podcast. Join in the fun there. Post in the emails thread on there if you want to post a question. Our first email this week is from Duncan, who's from Kent in the United Kingdom. Hi TNL, hope you're good. I'm ashamed to say I was a bit late to the party with Xenoblade 2 and only got around to it this January gone. I absolutely fell in love with this game. Being on Switch is so good for JRPGs, and I found every moment I could to fall back into the world of Alrest. I'm a father of 2, so my time is stupidly precious. In my head, it's in contention with Breath of the Wild for best Switch game. Since completing Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I've been on a bit of a JRPG kick, returning to my 3DS to play Dragon Quest VIII and Chrono Trigger, ordering a bootleg of the GBA Mother 3 translation, and having just started Tales of Vesperia on Switch, which I'd also highly recommend. All this while awaiting Dragon Quest XI to come to Switch later this year got me thinking about my first JRPG experience and how odd it was to be in the PAL region back in the 90s, when the rest of the world was getting so many great ones on the SNES. As a British Nintendo fan, I didn't have much exposure to JRPGs as a younger gamer. We didn't get any Final Fantasy games here until the PS1, and as I've always been a Nintendo guy, it wasn't until I got my GBA back in 2003 that I finally played my first Final Fantasy, Dawn of Souls. I picked this game up expecting it to be just like all the Zelda games that I'd been playing on the Game Boy, and got quite a shock the first time I entered a battle. Turn-based combat definitely didn't gel with me at first, but seeing as my money was tighter back then, I persevered. I'm glad I did. This version of the original Final Fantasy became my chill-out game in which I'd grind into the small hours while listening to CD albums on repeat. This repetitive nature, which is so often criticized by games media, is actually what I love about these games. I feel invested in the characters because I remember every stat boost they got, and I had to work hard for them. This, combined with a great story, is so good for character investment and getting an emotional response from me, the player. My question is, what were your first JRPG experiences, and what do you love about them? I'd also love to hear your thoughts on repetitive grinding. I get that it takes a long time, but that's why handhelds are perfect for it. As always, thanks for the great work you do. I wouldn't have played half the games I did without your great coverage. Duncan from Kent.
Fantastic. Thank you, Duncan, for that email and really going through a lot of your RPG experience, which is a genre I think that we have both come into in more recent years than opposed to when we were younger, despite the fact that we both grew up with like the quintessential RPG of our generation, which is Pokemon, right? And I think it's interesting because you talk about Pokemon all the time, and it's not necessarily left out of conversations with RPGs, but I think it's less thought of as a traditional RPG than a Dragon Quest or a Final Fantasy, because it is slightly more unique and different, and it's kind of Nintendo's take.
It was successful in the UK in the 90s, which a lot of these other ones weren't.
Exactly right. And so because we never, like, Chrono Trigger was never released here, neither was Final Fantasy 6 or 4 or any of these games, so that's why really as young people we didn't really know much about Final Fantasy or weren't really into it. The first time I really heard about Final Fantasy was in a magazine before Final Fantasy X was coming out, and I saw it and I was like, this looks like the most realistic thing I've ever seen, and that was my first kind of exposure to the series. But it was mainly Pokemon that was the biggest deal back then. So when I was playing Pokemon, I didn't even know what an RPG was, right? So like I didn't have much to compare it to. I didn't really think about it in terms of this is a turn-based combat system. It's just like, this is Pokemon, the video game, the franchise, the media empire that I love in a video game, and I'm playing it. You know, that's kind of how I felt about it at the time. What about you, Bally?
Yeah, for me as well, it was Pokemon. I wasn't as invested into Pokemon as you were at the time, MZ. Like, I didn't beat Red and Blue at the time. I enjoyed them, I played them, but I think this is another reason that it took me a long time to get into JRPGs, and it wasn't really until this podcast that I started playing JRPGs other than Pokemon, really. And that was the fact that I just didn't beat games generally, and JRPGs and RPGs are traditionally very long and take a long time to beat.
Right, they require you to invest, and they also require you to follow along and finish a storyline, and like be up on the systems and the characters and everything.
And that just wasn't a patience I had as like a younger gamer who played a lot of sort of Mario sports games, racing games, driving games that you could just dip in, dip out.
Yeah, like you look at the games that we played when we were younger together, and it's a
like
lot of Mario Party, it's a lot of Mario Kart, it's multiplayer centric games that we could dip in and out of and not necessarily be like, oh, I rolled credits on this thing. It's definitely in my older years of playing games that I have started to be like, oh, I want to appreciate games in a different way than I did back then.
So as someone who, like, one of the first games I kind of beat when I was younger was a game, as in like a long story driven game. Well, it's not story driven, but there's a story that's important. There's a game like Wind Waker, and like I feel like playing an action RPG is kind of the first step in a sense before you tackle maybe the longer JRPG format.
I mean, that's even if you want to classify Zelda as an action RPG, which is kind of questionable.
Well, sure, yeah.
I would say Breath of the Wild and Zelda 2 are the closest Zelda gets to RPG status, just because they have numbers and levels and things like that.
Levels, yeah.
Which Zelda 2 is much more explicit about that. That game is very much an RPG, whereas Breath of the Wild is more like a very, very light action RPG in terms of you have clothing that has numbers associated with it, and you will get better clothing which gives you higher numbers. So it's very light in that sense, but you could argue for it. There's a Reset Era thread that I was looking at recently, which is relevant to this email because it's the top 101 Reset Era voted RPGs of all time, and they do include Breath of the Wild on that list, which is I don't necessarily agree with, but you can kind of say an RPG is whatever you want these days, really.
And I like Duncan's story that like he thought that Final Fantasy was going to play like Zelda or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And I know that someone like Dan Riker at Giant Bomb, he's famous for saying like he just felt RPGs were completely pointless. This idea that you didn't have action-based combat, exactly. And I think to some extent I kind of agreed with that a little bit when I was younger. I was never keen on trying games that kind of went away from action. Pokemon was very much a standalone in that idea of having a non-action based mechanic in a game, I guess, and stuff like Pokemon Stadium as well, obviously. But like, it wasn't really the next JRPG I really played after Pokemon, and obviously I played lots of Pokemon. Like Diamond and Pearl was my last kind of Pokemon game I played generation on generation. But actually Xenoblade Chronicles, I want to say, right up when
that's a hell of a job
we did this podcast. Exactly. I can't think of one I played between those. You can count like some of the like Mario Tennis on Game Boy Color. That's an RPG, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that because I think those are the ones that you probably got more invested in, but it was more because you were a tennis fan than you were an RPG fan.
Right.
Like it just so happened that Mario Tennis game was secretly a RPG in disguise.
Exactly, and there's obviously a hell of a lot of action involved with that game.
Totally.
Then, it wasn't until Xenoblade Chronicles, and then it wasn't until like Earthbound, and then games like Final Fantasy VI and Octopath Traveler, which I played both of last year. I like, it is kind of slim pickings in terms of like the JRPGs I've played, and I personally really want to play, Final Fantasy VII, Chrono Trigger. Like, these are games I really mean to spend time playing, and I need to try like a Dragon Quest as well. So there's a whole lot I still want to play. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest JRPG fan, but I like things I enjoy most in JRPGs are like a manageable system. So Octopath Traveler was so perfect for me in terms of like difficulty and systems. Like, it just really, I just absolutely loved it. It was, I had to engage my brain, but it wasn't like ramming myself up against a brick wall. Like,
it wasn't Xenoblade Chronicles X levels of minutia,
right? And that's a perfect example of a game I spent about 20-30 hours on, and then was just like, this is too much. I just need to step back and realize that I'm not actually having a good time, and rather than persevering for more than what's already a very long time. Just think, actually, there's better games that are more suited to my tastes, perhaps.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so that's why I think Octopath really fits all my tastes in a way that I just really, really enjoyed. And Earthbound as well, I think that's quite a simplistic system and just a zany story. I think story is a huge aspect, but I can definitely let systems get in the way of a story, where I actually thought the Xenoblade Chronicles X story was kind of interesting up until where I was, but those mechanics were just like...
You just don't finish that game because you'll be unsatisfied with the way that game ends as well. Yeah.
And I personally found the final boss of Xenoblade Chronicles very difficult, and
right. But it's interesting that you pushed through that and you didn't with Kingdom Hearts. Was that more of the you were kind of invested?
Because I think it's only a mistake you make once.
Oh wow! Okay.
I think Xenoblade Chronicles felt like I could get there, and that it was just perseverance, whereas Kingdom Hearts, it felt like I was never
hopeless.
Gonna get there. It was hopeless. It was absolutely hopeless. It was.
I mean, you can add Kingdom Hearts now to your list of JRPGs. It's an action RPG, but it still comes under the banner.
And it in terms of the RPG stuff it does, I don't rate it, but like I said earlier this episode, there's some cool like worlds and stories that it tells that I think are really cool. Cool.
For me, it's interesting because I would say that technically Fire Emblem is also a JRPG in some senses, right? And so I kind of went from Pokemon to Fire Emblem, which was my next big experience. But Fire Emblem is also a very different type of game, and it's turn-based tactics with RPG. Like it's this beautiful combination of the both. So when I'm talking about like traditional RPGs, it really for me wasn't until I guess Dragon Quest IX was the one where I committed to it, and I was like, I've heard a lot about this Dragon Quest series. People go crazy about it. It's on DS, and it was also like it was my first year of uni, I think, and I had my laptop, and I didn't have a bunch of games with me. I had my Wii, I think, and I didn't have that much stuff. So I wanted to try a bunch of games, and this was when I first started listening to podcasts. So I was listening to RFN a lot and stuff, and they talked about things like Golden Sun and Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, and I downloaded emulators. I was telling you, Bally, we're discussing about Backlog Club games potentially, and you brought up Breath of Fire on GBA, and I'm like, yeah, I remember playing that on an emulator in a lecture, in an English lecture at university, and not paying attention to what they were saying, but playing one of those on GBA, and so stuff like that. Like I dabbled in Golden Sun for a bit, I dabbled in Breath of Fire, like, so I never finished any of these games, but I was just checking them out and seeing kind of what they were like.
Oh, so you have dabbled in Golden Sun, that's interesting.
Oh yeah, I've played maybe 5 or 6 hours of the first Golden Sun. I've never finished it. I also have played about 5 or 6 hours of Golden Sun Dark Dawn on DS, and have never finished that either. But like it was when I was talking to Nick a lot, and I had an Ace card on DS, and so I was downloading a fuck ton of ROMs and like, just messing around with a bunch of different video games. I actually I downloaded a Game Boy emulator for my Ace card so I could play Game Boy games on my DS, and I messed around with the original Dragon Quest on Game Boy for a while before I went back and eventually played that. So I was very curious about RPGs around that time, so I was very much like figuring them out and being like, which one should I commit to, what should I like? And the one that I really did commit to was Dragon Quest IX. I think Dragon Quest IX is a perfect jumping in point for that series. It's portable, as Duncan kind of mentioned, like it's the best way to play RPGs. Had a very simple story, really great looking game, and it is as traditional as they come. Dragon Quest is as traditional as a JRPG gets. It is like the blueprint for them. So it was a great introduction to the series, and then after that I was like, okay, I need to find something different. And so I got a PS3, and then my next big experience was Final Fantasy 13 on PlayStation 3, which everyone hates. I get it. People dislike Final Fantasy 13. I love it. I think it's one of my favorite games. It's just the combat system is among my favorite combat systems in video games generally. Like I just think it is so smart, and it's one of those things, how we talked about with Mario Maker about like conveniences for the player, and even with Kingdom Hearts, like the easy mode of like, what are the modernizations? Like one of my favorite things that Final Fantasy 13 does is after every battle, it just automatically heals you. There's none of this micromanagement with potions and stuff and getting rid of status effects, which I think is a big part of the experience of classic RPGs, where you're dungeon crawling, and especially with Pokemon as well.
I don't have the right cure to this damn thing that I
exactly
need to
right.
with it,
Like you're poisoned and you're taking damage everywhere you walk, or one of your Pokemon is paralyzed. Like the traditional dungeon crawl of an RPG. This game doesn't really have that, but it's because it focuses so heavily on every battle, and it says like every battle is going to be a challenge. Figure it out, man. Like, get it done. And so it automatically heals you after every fight. I just thought that was just a smart innovation that not many games have taken since, but like if I was to make a game, that's the type of thing I would do. So it was kind of, I would say my first real modern experiences with RPGs were Dragon Quest IX or Final Fantasy 13. Weird places to start, I guess, for both of those series, but games I really like. And then from there, it was just like the floodgates started opening, and I was like, give me all the RPGs. And obviously, I'm a big fan of Persona, and I've played. Really, my blank spot is Western RPGs, because The Witcher 3 is really the high mark, and I haven't played many other.
Is it very numbers based, Witcher 3?
Yeah, I mean it is. It's very much an RPG. It is, but it is also skill based. It is much more because it's action focused. You can get past bosses that have a lot of HP. It'll just take a long time. They'll be spongy.
Horizon Zero Dawn's got a ton of numbers as well, but that's.
I mean, you can count Horizon as an RPG to some degree,
but feels like almost every game now has like a level, even like Spider-Man, and like it's kind of weird.
Yeah, but I do think Horizon it falls more into the RPG trope because you do level up. There are statistics. You do gain health every time you level, and also each equipment thing that you have has numbers associated with it. Everything that you equip to your character, every weapon that you use has damaged stuff. But again, it starts to blur the line, and I think Horizon is included on that Reset Era thread.
Oh, is it? Right.
So they do count it as an RPG, which is it's as however much you want to bend the rules. But yeah, like I definitely was a latecomer to the genre, but I think it is absolutely one of my favorite genres now. I count it among like platformers and stuff as right up there with my favorite types of video games, and yeah, some of my favorite games of all time are RPGs.
Yeah, I feel you're considerably more open-minded about the types of RPGs you can get into, whereas for me it needs to. There's certain things and like tick boxes that I think just need ticked, and one of them is like difficulty and the ability to beat the damn game. Totally.
And personally, I like RPGs that tend to be easier, and I think difficulty in RPGs is very weird, because to what degree is difficulty grinding and to what degree is difficulty actual skill, right?
Yeah.
Because there are some games in which the difficulty of it, and I think this is the case with Dragon Quest, is like you're just not high enough level. Like you can come up with the greatest tactics of all time, but if you're not high enough level, you're not doing enough damage to take that down this boss quick enough to survive long enough, right? So that's kind of the balance that gets struck sometimes in these games. But then you have games like Xenoblade 2, where I think the systems of that game allow you to pull off these moves that do obscene numbers of damage, and that's because you are good at the game. You're good at pulling off combos, and that's kind of why I think that ranks pretty highly in my combat system list. Is it's all about your own skill with it as much as it is how high level you are. It's kind of a good balance struck there. So yeah, but what about grinding? How do you feel about grinding, Darren? I think we do complain about it from time to time, but it for me, it depends on the game. It depends on how much I like the game, how much time I like spending in that world, Something like Witcher 3, I was really overleveled by the end, but that's because the side quests in that game are so fucking good, and I want to do everything. I just wanted to do everything in The Witcher 3, and it was less grinding. It was more, this stuff is so great that I want to do all of it.
Yeah, I think what you're doing to grind is important. I'm happy to spend half an hour, 45 minutes for every few hours of a JRPG, I can just grind while listening to podcasts. That doesn't bother me too much. If that ratio is much more than 45 minutes, half an hour for like every few hours, then it does get very tedious. I think
right, and I think that's one of the reasons why Final Fantasy VI ranks lower in my Super Nintendo RPG ranking. Is the end of that game is like, hey man, spend 4 hours grinding, because you have so many characters and like they need to be a certain level.
Yeah,
whereas you have something like Earthbound and Chrono Trigger, which way better in terms of their pacing, and there's
Right.
really no need to grind in either of those games.
Yeah, and like I was very glad that Final Fantasy VI has that glitch.
Oh yeah, it has an exploit, which
an
is
exploit.
I love having an exploit that you can just level crazily on. That's always good.
And it's not ideal that you use an exploit to make a weak part of the game better, but it's better than it not being there, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally.
And, like,
Yeah.
But I agree that Earthbound was an incredibly like slickly paced game in the sense that there's just there is no grinding really. You can just play right through that, and if you've got the right items.
I remember going to in On It, I think, or maybe Tucson, where I was grinding a little bit on like the skateboarder guys. Like I remember going back and forth to my house a little bit and healing, but that was maybe, I don't know, 25 minutes out of a game that is 20 hours long, you know?
Yeah, it's a bit longer than 20 hours.
It's 30-ish. yeah, 30-ish or so.
Yeah, and I think Octopath had its issues with grinding, and we've talked about before, like leveling up all 8 party members, and ultimately, if you want to beat all the stories, you need to level up all 8 party members, and I actually think that seeing all 8 stories is like a part of the game I enjoyed, but having to level them all up was less fun, definitely. And
yeah, I mean, that's kind of the difference here, right? Is there wasn't a big end game thing for Octopath Traveler, so I just gave up and couldn't care about it. Whereas with Final Fantasy,
I mean, there's post game, but it's not main
right?
game,
But like Octopath Traveler, there's no overarching story. Whereas Final Fantasy VI, like this is the
there is.
Yeah, okay, there is an overarching story. It's bullshit because they never talk about it ever. And then the last boss fight.
Well, they do. It's like it's linked up.
But that's so like fucking nothing. That's not a narrative. That's just like themes being linked
We've
together.
talked about this before, and we have to agree to disagree. But I do think that it is. The 8 stories do link up in a satisfying way. It's just not. The level you were required to do that end game, post game stuff was just too much for me. But I disagree that I actually do think it is narratively a cool thing for the 8 stories to come together.
Right, but like my comparison is Final Fantasy VI, which is a huge scope of a narrative with all these characters interacting and all of these things mattering.
That's a much better way of a large number of characters meeting a final big bad. I completely agree. Yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
Right,
Yeah.
which is why I was incentivized. Also, obviously, we're doing it for a Backlog Club, so I had to beat it. But like, I wanted to grind. I wanted to grind to finish Final Fantasy VI versus I did 4 of the stories in Octopath and then just kind of said, I'm done. You know, because I wasn't really that invested in the endings of these other characters, and the stories that far hadn't been incredible. So that's kind of why I gave up there. So again, like that's a great example of where grinding in one game I'm incentivized to, whereas in the other I'm just like, nah, I'm done, thank you. And yeah, that's kind of that, I guess. But what are some of the big RPGs that are still on your hit list that you want to get to? Because for me, I've played a lot of the big ones. I think for me now, it's more about going for kind of the more niche ones, like the Suikoden series, which gets brought up all the time. Or for me, it's a lot about going through and playing some more Western RPGs, whether it be stuff like Divinity or Pillars of Eternity or classics like that. I think that's my next frontier in terms of RPG playing. But I think you're probably still in like
there are some still huge tentpoles that I need to play.
Yeah, there's some big classics that you want to get to.
Final Fantasy VII, Chrono Trigger. I actually own Chrono Trigger on DS. I bought it from a listener, so thank you very much for that. And yeah, Final Fantasy VII. I think I should play Persona 5 on my PS4.
Yeah.
Those are the next 2. I mean, Witcher 3, we've counted that as an RPG in line with this. Yeah.
I mean, it is, yeah. I think the thing is, like, when we talk about RPGs and being a Nintendo podcast, we tend towards Japanese ones far more. I do personally. But like, there's a whole world of Western RPGs out there, and I think that is my next thing I need to really invest in, is like trying some of those. But for me, a lot of the major ones, things like Skyrim's a huge one, actually. Skyrim's a huge one that I love. I think Skyrim's fantastic. But stuff like Fallout is just aesthetically so far from anything I care about that I just don't care about the Fallout series in any way. But yeah, and I think that's the thing, is for me, aesthetically, Western RPGs tend to be a bit more drab. So that's why I tend towards the brightness and the colour of Japanese games more.
Yeah. So I think we both got a lot still to play.
Yeah, definitely. But no, that was fun to kind of think about. Like, I really had to think about, like, what was the first RPG I really invested in and got into that wasn't like when I was younger and just playing Pokemon or Fire Emblem or whatever. And to some degree there was like some like Game Boy games and stuff I might have played that were secretly RPGs that I've forgotten about, but I feel like in the modern age of me playing video games, it is. But I owned an original PlayStation, but I never played Final Fantasy VII. I never played the big RPGs of that system, and that system was held up back in the day as like the golden era. It was like Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 was the golden era of RPGs, and there are so many of those I want to go back to. Like Xenogears is a huge one. People love Xenogears, and obviously that's a Monolith Soft game, one of the first Xeno games they ever made. And also the other Final Fantasies on PlayStation, so Final Fantasy 9, which is now on Switch, which I desperately want to get to at some point. There's obviously my goal in life is to play every Dragon Quest and every Final Fantasy, which I'm closer on the Dragon Quest front. I've got 4 more Dragon Quests to play than Final Fantasy, but I'll get there with both of them. It is my cause, and I will get there. So
nice.
Yeah.
So our next question is from Kevin S. from Discord. Hello, Bally and Zed. I've been looking at the games I've been playing recently and noticed a bit of an interesting trend. When I play Western AAA games, I tend to play them for the story. I love swinging in Spider-Man, but what kept me going was the excellent story and characters in that game, and that style of game. The same can be said for Uncharted, Infamous, Horizon Zero Dawn, Red Dead, Batman Arkham, God of War, Mass Effect, Wolfenstein, Bioshock, Assassin's Creed, Red Dead, and the list goes on to the far end of the spectrum of the Telltale-esque games that are almost completely story. In stark contrast, when I play Japanese AAA games, I almost always play them more for the fun, responsive and challenging gameplay experience first and foremost. Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Donkey Kong, Dark Souls, etc. There's obvious exceptions to this rule, but I feel like Japanese game development stuck to a philosophy dating back to the NES days of make the game fun first and foremost and make the primary focus of the experience. Whereas Western games tend to be much more based on making a narrative first and making gameplay centered around that. The end result is that you have games like Red Dead that have ultra-realistic graphics and physics with hours and hours of amazingly written cutscenes and dialogue but don't feel good to control on one extreme end. On the polar opposite, you have games like Bloodborne that have almost no direct story but focus on ultra-tight controls and a punishing yet rewarding, challenging gameplay experience. There's also the parallel that most indie developers of games we play tend to be from Western studios, and they usually go along with the Japanese philosophy. It's more feasible to make a fun game than an ultra-realistic game on a budget. What are your thoughts? Which do you prefer? I've come to realize I really prefer the Japanese approach. I'm having the most fun in a video game when it's fun to play, though I do love Western games as well for completely different reasons.
Okay. Big topic, I think, and very interesting one. I think it's really interesting he brings up the point of most independent games are from Western studios, but they are all very Japanese influence, right? Like, you take a look at the biggest successes in independent games, and almost all of them have analogs to classic Nintendo NES or Super Nintendo era franchises. Like Shovel Knight is the biggest example of that, and then you also have games like Celeste, where it does tend towards like classic platforming, but it's also trying to do the Western thing more often now, which is like build in a narrative that is meaningful and makes sense with the story, which I think we're kind of starting to tend towards a bit more, right? And it does depend, right? Because then you also have the other side of the coin, which is Western indies, which are more influenced by Western narrative development, so games like Night in the Woods or Oxenfree that come out of the Telltale model that kind of has been popularized. I think as a podcast generally we tend towards Japanese games just because, being Nintendo fans, like those are the games that we respond to the most. But I do think that you probably like a good narrative in a game more than I do, and I think that as people I tend towards more mechanics and you tend towards more story, though we both place importance on both aspects.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I think for me, stories in games are still feeling quite big and fresh and new, in a sense that I have bought a PS4 fairly recently. There aren't a ton of story-driven experiences on... Well, there are now with the Switch, but talking about the Wii U era and before, I think the number of narrative-driven games on purely Nintendo systems, which is what I traditionally owned, were fairly slim by and large. So I think that having now owned a PS4 and played games like Spider-Man, like God of War, where it is really about. And you see, Spider-Man and God of War are really interesting because I think
they are, because I think they're both amazing.
They are
video
amazing
games.
at both, and
Yeah.
I think that Red Dead 2, playing that after Spider-Man and God of War, really kind of shocked me. Where I was like, "Oh God, this feels awful. Like this feels like I thought I don't know why I assumed, and I probably hadn't done enough reading into it. I just assumed Red Dead 2 would feel as smooth as these other games and have an incredible cowboy narrative over the top. And it just didn't have that base level gameplay in a way that I was
exactly. And I think that's because Rockstar tends towards one end of the spectrum. Like, they are very much in the extreme of, we want this to embody everything about the feel and the tone and everything, and that's right down to the gameplay systems themselves, which feel as lethargic and almost hopeless as a lot of the kind of narrative tones of the game, right?
Yeah.
When you are in the mountains looking for John Marston at the start of that game, it feels like you are fucking trudging through a snowstorm.
Yeah.
And great. That's great for the narrative, lack of the there's a lack of dissonance there because what you are playing is so in tune with what the story is telling you, and yet video games are also this thing that we play because we want to feel a sense of empowerment and a sense that we're not just a human trudging through snow, you know? So for me, it is that weird balance, and I think as someone who personally tends towards the Japanese model of gameplay first and foremost, it made me frustrated faster because of that.
Yeah, and I agree. I tend to more story more so than you, perhaps, but I would still definitely go for the gameplay above all else in a sense. And I actually think, as we've said, Spider-Man and God of War are fantastic examples. I throw in, although it leans far more towards the Japanese style, throw in Breath of the Wild in the sense that it does have a lot more Western aspects in it than a traditional Nintendo game might have. And I actually think,
it's the first time they put voice acting in a Zelda game.
And I think Spider-Man, God of War, and Breath of the Wild are three of my favorite games of all time, and are still like doing both of those aspects incredibly well.
But also you can compare Breath of the Wild more to Bloodborne. Like, he talks about how Bloodborne doesn't tell an explicit narrative, but it's more about like figuring things out through lore and through things that are not like no direct story, right?
Yeah.
And Breath of the Wild does that really well because there are so many areas in Breath of the Wild. Like, you think about the Guardian field of just all the dead Guardians, and it's like it evokes a feeling, and it evokes a history, and it evokes a lore, but it doesn't necessarily come from a narrative, like direct narrative.
It comes from your own self-discovery through the gameplay in a way that isn't just
right. So to some degree, it makes narrative gameplay, right? In a weird way, and there's less of that, but yeah, it's interesting the games that he lists, because some of them I pick out that lineup and I'm like, okay, that one I play because I like the story, that one I actually play because, like, Infamous, for example, is a game that, to be honest with you, I don't think it has a very good story. Like, it's fine, like, it's very comic booky, it's kind of schmaltzy, and like the characters are not super deep. But Infamous is a game that I play for the fucking gameplay, because that game is all about zipping around and sliding on, electrical wires and like hovering, and that game feels great to play. It's a really fun open world environment to explore and just run around in. But it is also in the style of a Western open world game, so it does have a narrative. But for me, like, games like Wolfenstein is the opposite, where Wolfenstein, I put it on the easiest possible difficulty, just kill all the Nazis, but I'm there to watch the ridiculous cutscenes and see the crazy things that they do with that story. So it balances out. Like, some of these games, as you mentioned, with God of War, Spider-Man, they are the kind of rare exception where they perfect it on both ends.
Yeah.
But most of the time, a Western AAA game for me either goes one of two ways. And sometimes it goes neither way, in the case of Horizon Zero Dawn, where I was underwhelmed by both aspects,
I really enjoyed Horizon Zero Dawn's narrative, but I can appreciate that gameplay-wise, it is nothing like as silky smooth as a Spider-Man or a God of War. Like, I'm interested to see what Jedi Fallen Order is like in melding these two ideas together, where I'm hoping that it is going to have a strong narrative, it is going to have that strong story, but still feel like, you know, the Dark Souls Bloodborne style combat that game's Sekiro style, I guess, as well, that game's hinting towards, and whether it can stand kind of on that pedestal up with Spider-Man and God of War, where I just think those games just hit it out of the park. And kind of having God of War being my first ever PS4 experience just has really spoiled me on what I expect now from like, that game is just incredible. And it's now a high bar that I think the whole industry is now trying to meet with a lot of games like a Jedi Fallen Order later this year. So we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I'm excited about that, and I think hopefully it will be good. But for me, the thing that excites me about what they're saying is it's weird, right? Because we're huge Star Wars fans and we just love the Star Wars universe, all that stuff. But the thing that excites me more about Jedi Fallen Order is the fact that they're saying it's a Metroid game more than it being a Star Wars game. Like, I'm buying it probably because it's a Star Wars game, but the reason I'm excited about it now is, like, they've said it's a Metroid, and I'm like, okay, all right, you have my attention now, right? So on that side of things, it does tell me that despite the fact that a lot of these Western games, the main draw is maybe the narrative, for me it still has to have a gameplay hook to it that gets me invested, because otherwise I'm going to check out, just like I did with Red Dead. Like, I beat that game, but like I was so far beyond even wanting to play it by the end.
I had a real journey with that game personally, where the start is so slow and flat out just bad in a way where the narrative's not even saving it, and then for me the narrative just really accelerated later in that game, and I really loved the game in the end, but it was too long of a journey, definitely, in comparison to those, you know, Spider-Man, God of War that we've talked about, like getting it right.
But it does say things like, when you talk about critical responses to games and how I think a bad story can really hold a game back, right? And I think that you do see that sometimes reflected in review scores of certain Western games that get released. But the opposite...
Yeah, because you're expected to have a good story if you're going for that style of AAA Western narrative. Like, if Horizon 2 has a horrendous story, which I'm assuming you're thinking it will. Like,
well,
it will
it's personal taste, but sure.
Sure, it will get panned, I feel, even if the gameplay is a massive step up, for example, because I think people are now expecting a certain level of development on the narrative told in that first game. It's the same with God of War and Spider-Man, to be honest.
I mean, it's what you see with the Telltale style of game, right? If the game is poorly written, if it doesn't have a satisfying arc, if it's not well realized, like the example I go to is the Game of Thrones Telltale game, which I was excited about. They had all the actors in, blah blah blah. That game is just not very good. It's not, and it's not because the game part is bad, because there really isn't much of a game part to it. That's the nature of Telltale's stuff, is that it's all choosing dialogue from a menu. So it's as much of a game as it is like a choose your own adventure style book, right? So in that case, it hinges completely on whether the story is good or not. And the opposite is interesting, because then you also have games like Mario Odyssey, which has no story. It has a framework of a base of a potential foundation for perhaps an inch of a story. Like, it's less than a children's storybook is Mario Odyssey. Like, you can tell that entire story in about 3 pages of a children's book, right?
Yes.
And yet, it's a game that scores 97 on Metacritic. And that fundamentally tells me that still in this age where we are tending towards more Hollywood-style action experiences, where cinematics and things are...
The budgets are getting bigger and bigger.
Budgets are getting bigger, everything is getting more expensive. When it really comes down to it, if you make a game that's just a really fucking good video game that you can play and enjoy and brings a smile to your face, you don't need that. Like, you just don't. Which is interesting, right? Because Nintendo's entire ethos is built around what is a fun gameplay experience first and foremost. Then we'll figure out the rest. Then we'll build something around it. We'll figure out what the story can be and all of that nonsense. Yeah. But it is first and foremost, how does this play? What experience can we get from this?
Yeah. And in line with this question, I had huge, like, tribalism towards the idea that God of War beat Red Dead 2 at kind of a lot of the different Game Awards. I was like, come on, gameplay first and foremost, here we go. And obviously I wanted Celeste to win, but I knew that was going to be difficult.
It's a long shot, yeah.
And it is frustrating when you do see those scores, like for a game like Red Dead 2 being as high and often higher than a game like God of War, when we've just agreed that like one gets the gameplay so right where the other one flops massively in our view. And like,
right, well, but that's the thing, right? But if you talk about both those games, Mario Odyssey and Red Dead Redemption are perfect examples of the opposite ends of the spectrum. In one case, the developer has first and foremost prioritized the player experience and the gameplay and the joy and the fun of control. On the other end, the gameplay experience has been shoved to the side and the narrative has been given the full thrust. That is the thing to focus on. That is the time and investment and effort. And so we have these two completely opposite experiences, but they both completely nail that one thing.
I would argue a lack of a narrative holds back Mario Odyssey less than a lack of good gameplay holds back Red Dead 2, personally.
And I agree. Yeah. I agree with that. But what I'm saying is from a critical perspective, when you talk about...
Yeah, it's a shame that that difference isn't reflected in our review score.
Totally. Yeah. The fact that Red Dead pretty much got 10s across the board, I don't know what that says about the people who were potentially reviewing that game.
Does that mean if Red Dead 3, whatever that is, if that ever is a thing, if somehow miraculously Rockstar reinvent their control system and that game controls well?
No, I don't think so, because all I heard about GTA 5 was positive stuff, right? I never heard anyone complain about the control in GTA 5. And yet I went and played some GTA 5 prior to even playing Red Dead, and I'm like, boy, well, this doesn't feel good. This feels bad. Yeah. I don't want to play GTA 5 anymore. I've had GTA 5 on my Steam wish list for years and years, and I have zero intention of playing it anymore. And maybe it's because I think the shift happened around the PlayStation 3 generation, where Rockstar wanted to get more serious, and they wanted to tend away from kind of the silly goofiness of some of the earlier GTA games. Because I remember playing GTA 3 on PS2, and I didn't have any problems with the controls there. It was more arcadey, I guess, in its feel, and it felt better to run around and blow things up and just like drive shit. Whereas GTA 4, they started to lean into this realism thing that they've been going for, and it means that the experience of actually playing the game becomes, for me, a bit of a chore. And I don't think they're like, it's very much a deliberate choice from them as a studio. It's the polar opposite, because like, I don't think there's really been a better controlling player character than Mario in Mario Odyssey in terms of the tool set, the movement. Yeah. Like, it feels perfect. And so I think it's very interesting to directly compare those two games, because they are, one is a Western studio, one's a Japanese studio. One is so story, one is so gameplay, and they both scored 97 on Metacritic. I just think that's a very interesting thing to observe in our modern era of video games and how they work and everything. But yeah, to wrap it up, I guess I obviously prefer the Japanese approach, and I think that we're in kind of a renaissance period for the Japanese games industry. I think Nintendo didn't really fall into the trap that a lot of game developers did during the PS3 generation. I think like last generation especially, Western developers became much more of a focus because Japan couldn't handle HD development, and like a lot of the stuff they put out wasn't great during that period of time. Whereas now we're really seeing like the rise of Capcom, and things like Dark Souls have come into vogue, and Japan is like kind of back almost in a way that is exciting again, because it feels like those types of experiences are influencing Western games now, and like we're getting, I think, a bit more of a cross-pollination across all these types of video games.
Definitely, yeah.
Which is just good for everything, I think. So
absolutely.
Great.
Right.
All right.
Well, that's what we've got. That's all the time we have for emails.
Yeah.
That email address again is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That's thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Please send them in, or leave a post in our Discord server over on our Twitter account and in the description of this here podcast. MBZ.
Yes.
We've got an announcement.
Yeah, I guess so. We're doing another Backlog Club. The time has come, and we know that it's a busy season for Nintendo games, so we've kind of gone in a direction. Bally brought this idea up of it's more shorter experiences, but also kind of invest as much time in them as you want to. Do you want to tell people what our theme is for this poll for our next Backlog Club?
So all three of these games are Nintendo 64, and they're all available on the Wii U eShop, that good old thing that we go back to every now and then. We've gone for a racing theme. So we've not talked about racing games a ton on this podcast. Back in the day, I used to love games like Wave Race and F-Zero, but these are on the GameCube, obviously. So the racing games we've got for this N64 Backlog Club, the three nominees are Wave Race 64, Excite Bike 64, and F-Zero X. And I should be clear, neither of us have played any of these games. No. I've played a couple of the equivalent games on GameCube with Wave Race Blue Storm and F-Zero GX. Had a great time with both of those games.
We both played like the spiritual Excite successor, which is Excite Truck.
We both played Excite
on
Truck.
Wii.
I've played the original Excite Bike back on the 3DS and 3D.
Yeah, I played some of that as well, for sure.
But we've not played Excite Bike 64. So yeah, this is going to be a poll open until... When are we going to open it until, MBZ?
We'll give it, maybe after next episode, we'll give you one more chance to vote, and then we'll get it started.
So this is open for voting to all patrons. We currently have 20 patrons, so all 20 of you are welcome to vote on which game you would like us to play in this Backlog Club, and for
that's
the community
$1 and up patrons. So if you want to head over there and have a vote and get your choice, then you can go and become a patron over on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. Bally, we have people to thank for our Patreon and stuff.
Yes, thank you to our two $10 tier patrons. They are my fiancée Caroline and Atari Alex. Thank you for your support, and thank you to all of our other 18 patrons that I mentioned, and I hope you have good fun voting on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So head over to there, tell us what you think, Excite Bike or Wave Race or F-Zero, all N64, hopefully. And then I was using my gamepad, Bally, and I feel like I need to hold it every time in the charger because it's going to die otherwise. But I'm looking forward to playing some of those handheld, as well. So
just plug in that Wii U and then just play with the gamepad across the room.
Yeah. And obviously, if you own an N64, you want to play the original versions, go ahead. We're not stopping you. Just any way you get access to these games, play along, and then we'll have a chat for the winner in our Discord and stuff like that. And also, you can email us in thoughts when that goes out. Cool. We can be found in lots of places as well. You can find us on Twitter. Our Twitter account is @TNL Podcast. You can follow us there for updates on things like this, like links to voting in the patron poll and stuff like that. And you can follow us individually. You can find me @LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter @Ballyman91, BALLYMAN91. Not been doing a ton recently, just been busy with them Kingdom Hearts.
Oh yeah, figuring out the meaning of life in Kingdom Hearts.
Oh god.
Great. You can find the show in lots of different places. We're all over the place now. We're on Spotify. We are on TuneIn, so you can find us through your Alexa. We are on iTunes, obviously, and Stitcher, and any good podcasting app that you have. You can download us on. Feel free to review us. We keep saying this, but I think it is important to make note of, reviews are important, and they make people find the show, and then people are like, oh, this seems like an okay show. I'll listen to it, and then we get more listeners, and it's a fun time.
If you've stuck around since E3, thank you for sticking around. This is our
absolutely.
first
if you found us through
post E3 show, so hope you found us enjoyable and want to listen to more.
Absolutely, that would be great. Fantastic. Well, I think that's pretty much it, Bally. Anything that we need to think about? It's Mario Maker this month. Fire Emblem's closing in. It's pretty soon that we're going to be talking about Fire Emblem on this show.
I should be clear. I have a document where I have to plan out what games I'm going to be playing in the rest of 2019. It's come to this. Backloggery is not quite good. Not quite cutting it anymore. I need an actual document where I say, right, I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to play this. So, yeah, it's a bit crazy, but it's all fun. It's a nice problem to have. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It is. It's a good thing. Great. Well, that is going to close us out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another podcast. Till then, thank you. See you then. Bye-bye. The musical interlude used on today's show was the night version of the title screen from Super Mario Maker 2. Copyright Nintendo 2019.
And our first email this
And
week.
what is that email address?
I said the email address before.
Did you?
Yeah, thisNintendoLife at gmail.com. ThisNintendoLife at gmail.com, MBZ. I'm surprised you missed it. Jeez, right.
Okay, right, that's fine. I thought you missed it.
I definitely said.
Okay, good. I'm really paying
Check
attention.
the tape. Check the tape.
I'll check the tape. All right.
I nominate MBZ to check the tape,
Okay.
and you're probably going to post like, "Yep, MBZ was right.
Okay.
Pally never said it."
All right.
So,
Okay.
Smart ass MBZ coming in the future.
Okay.
Here we go.